If you are showing up, you are right on time. I think we'll maybe just wait one more minute in case we have some stragglers, but those of you who are here, you are here for turning high school writers into college writers. And this is going to be a webinar where we kind of take you from where you're at. Most of you, I'm imagining, are high school seniors, and kind of move you to where your mindset should be to be a successful college writer. And there isn't going to be any groundbreaking new information here, but I think what we are going to provide you is a really detailed, consistent list of what you can do in these next 9 months before you check into those dorms to see what you can change, what you can grow, what you can build upon. That was a lot of talking to just allow people another minute to show up, but I think it's a good time to get started.
10:01.
Beautiful. So let me share our slideshow here and get it in present mode. All right. So as we go here, we are going to be presenting, and it is important to us that you do feel the ability to ask questions. The best way to do that would be the question and answer function up there. You can also drop them in the chat. As we go, if anything comes up, if we say something that doesn't make sense or something that you want more information on, just drop something in there. We might keep talking for a minute, but we'll get to it eventually. But probably time for introductions. So welcome to Turning High School Writers into College Writers. My name is Stuart Easton. I am an academic mentor with ESM, and I am a former high school English teacher.
All right, and my name is Julia Che, and I'm an academic mentor with ESM too. I focus on humanities, and prior to working with ESM, I was working at a college for 2 years during my graduate studies. So I worked as both a writing counselor for graduate and undergraduate students, and I also taught a freshman composition class.
Perfect. And you can already see how we got to this point. We have someone who worked with high school writers and someone who worked with college writers. So we've kind of put our brains together and talked about what we can tell you that will smooth the gap between this, most likely your senior year of high school, and next year, most likely your freshman year of college, so that you don't have those same bumps and bruises. So looking at our slideshow, I'm unable to get it to change slides, which is annoying to me. So I'm going to hop out of here for just a second. We are going to set our agenda for the day as soon as I can get this slide to the next slide, which I don't. There we go. Okay. Hold on. There it is. Okay, we did it. As we said, we are writing experts, but we are technology webinar newbies. So our agenda today is essentially going to start off by introducing the importance of writing. If you're here, we have a pretty good sense that you understand this is important. We're going to talk about where you are. So we're going to kind of generally speak about where we expect you to be at this moment. Then we're going to highlight the differences between where you are and where you're going to be, or what's going to be expected of you when you get to college next fall. And then we're going to kind of give you those concrete steps you can take to get from A to B. While we do that, we want to make sure we provide you with specific resources. So we're going to really give you not just the steps to do it, but some things you can look at between now and then that'll highlight what is expected of a college writer, but where you can go to find things to help you do that. And we are going to look at a college level assignment. We don't have one specifically pulled up for you today, but we're going to talk about why that is and what we can do so that if you are hoping to get your hands on one, we can provide that for you. And oh man, there we go. So if we start with an introduction, why does writing matter more in college?
And I can talk a little bit about this. I know one of the wonderful things about college is you get to, if you hate writing, you can potentially major in something like engineering, mathematics, or physics, but you will still have to write for your major, and you'll have to write a lot. Not only that, but most of the core classes that you're going to take when you enter college are very writing heavy. So if you're taking like theology, philosophy, any of these things that they like to use to make you a well-rounded human being, you're going to have to write a lot for those classes. And on top of that, even if you are in engineering, towards the end of your college career, you're going to have to write major papers for this. So no matter what the class is, you're also going to have a lot of tests that tend to be more writing based. So I did have a few wonderful classes when I was in college that were multiple choice. But did you have these, Stuart? What was your experience with writing at a college level?
Well, I was an English major, so I was fairly writing heavy, but I did enjoy those multiple choice tests. But I will say I found it easier to master the writing tests, because if
Interesting.
you can listen to this webinar and get yourself into that space of writing, then it does become a little bit more manageable than memorizing, or at least for an English major like myself.
Yeah, Stuart can't complain about writing-based tests because he kind of did it to himself by majoring in English. But
Exactly.
another thing you're going to find with some of these classes is that some classes don't even have tests. Like you might have 2 or 3 essays throughout the course of the semester, and this is going to be either your entire grade or almost all of it. And homework, which is important still and can knock you down to like a B or C if you don't do it, becomes a much smaller percent of your grade.
Mm-hmm. And the thing I think I want to highlight there is we say no more worksheets, and it isn't 100% true, but I think the emphasis is maybe trying to point out that you're not going to be able to bolster your grade 50% just by turning in things every class. You might only have a class once a week. You might only have the class 15 times in a semester or something. So if you have that class 15 times and there's 3 essays and there's not really weekly homework, all of a sudden those essays are your grade.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
So I'm kind of curious, Stuart, you've worked with a lot of high school students, and I assume that any high school students that watch this are probably a little interested in writing already. So why is it important for them to think about this transition?
Yeah, so I think a lot of us can feel really confident coming out of high school in our writing abilities, and that can oftentimes be the case. You probably are a really good writer, but there is this gap between being able to write and being a successful college writer. And so I think I'll skip to that third bullet point first, which is maybe the metaphor. And again, you're dealing with writers here, so there's going to be some metaphors, but the fastest runner will lose a race of the course they don't know, or if they don't know the course. So the idea being that you can be an amazing writer, but college is set up a lot differently than high school when it comes to writing. There are less checkpoints, there's more independence, and there are these things that are part of the process that go beyond actual writing. And so you might think of the best authors, the best journalists. A lot of them aren't necessarily just good writers, but they're good at self-motivating, they're good at time management, they're good at meeting deadlines, hitting production. And some of them aren't good at those things. So if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you might have been waiting for decades for a new book. But the idea being that if you're a really good writer, you need to back that up with the structure, organization to kind of complete the task.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, as kind of an English person who always loved English classes in high school and I always got good grades in them, I could sit down and write, like knock out a paper the night before and get an A on it. I couldn't do that in college, and I'm confident about my writing skills. So it's going to take a lot more planning and organization than it did before.
Absolutely. And being a good first draft writer can get you through high school, but most college professors are going to be looking for really good final drafts, really good second, third, fourth drafts. They're going to be able to tell the difference between a good first draft and a good fourth draft. Yeah. So maybe your writing skills have carried you through high school, but now we need to kind of bolster those with the tools, work ethic, all those things that are going to turn you into a good college writer. And so let's talk about where we are now. So I'm going to take this, again, I'm kind of on the high school side of things here. Julie's on the college side. We've been planning this webinar for a while. We've talked a lot, so we've bridged the gap. But I thought I'd maybe just check in with you where you are now. Of course, you might not be exactly here. Your school could be different. Your experience could be different. But this is where high school teachers are trying to get you by the end. So you've probably been doing some researching. You've probably been researching from a more pre-selected group of materials that are more narrow in scope, and it's often an MLA format of citing, bibliographies, researching in general. And that is all amazing. I just want to highlight that because there's a good chance that your high school teacher has been really scaffolding the work, meaning that they've been helping you build by putting on those kind of bumper rails to keep you on track. That kind of goes the same for deadlines. Now, this isn't to take anything away from the hard work you've put in, but when you're meeting with a high school class, let's say, I would imagine no less than 3 times a week, but often 4 or 5, you do some work in class, you have these checkpoints along the way, and you have this consistent meeting with the teacher where if there is some bump in the road, there are extensions, there is late work accepted. So where you are now has probably been somewhat successful in this model of multiple meetings a week, really close monitoring, really close relationship. And that's great. But as we're going to see, some of that is going to change, and some of that you might have to change yourself. So, oh, and I have more to talk about. You also probably are drafting, but you're probably drafting in that same scaffolded way. And you might have graded drafts, but you might just have drafts that are submitted like, oh, I did it. You did the rough draft, you turned it in, you do some peer editing, you do some building it out with the teacher. You also probably have these assignment types that are a little less than what you're going to be expecting and what Julia is going to talk about in a moment. So for instance, you might have less argument, less comparison, less in depth. Your length is probably 2 to 5, although I'm sure there's people sitting watching this going, hey, I wrote a 7-pager this year. And that's true. That's totally fine. But on the whole, you're leaving high school with the understanding, with the ability to hit that 2 to 5 page length consistently. All of these are not to say that what you've done is not impressive, is not great, but it is, again, just highlighting some of the things that you might look in the mirror and be able to say about yourself now. If, like, for instance, if you're looking back at the end of college, you're probably going to look back and say these same things, and we're just giving you that foresight. And finally, obviously, with grammar and language, there is this thing with high school papers where it's almost, I don't want to say impossible to have those mistakes, but you have so many eyes on your paper. The responsibility isn't just your own. There's peer editing. You can bring it to your teacher. We have a lot of tools at our disposal in a high school that are going to allow us to not make those mistakes. That's where we see you at now. And so, Julia.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about what's going to be new and with our slightly cooperative slides.
Oh, it's coming, I promise. There we go.
All right. So when you first get to college, Stuart, I don't know if you had this experience, but for both undergrad and grad school, what they would do is they take you into a big room, you have your orientation, and someone comes up and basically says, if you plagiarize, we're going to kick you out of college. And at the time, I didn't take that very seriously, but especially for those of you who are going to good schools, plagiarism and violations of academic honesty can kill a school's reputation. So this is a big deal. So maybe in high school, your teacher would say something like, oh, you need to cite this. You need to be careful that this isn't too close to the original. But in college, you can actually be expelled for plagiarizing. So it becomes a really, really big deal. And another thing to think about is, at least at the colleges that I've attended, is you submit all of your papers through a database. And that database is going to include a huge number of articles that are pulled from the web. And it's also going to include all past student assignments, including your own. So this means when you submit that paper, it can't be too close to any other paper that's in the system, including one of your own papers. So if you're writing about a similar subject for 2 different classes, you need to make sure that you're not what they call self-plagiarizing. So this becomes a huge deal, and it becomes really, really tricky and complicated. Something I recommend for this is you can actually find plagiarism checkers on the internet and check your paper before you submit it. A nice teacher will have an extra, like, turn it in checker slot on their website, but not everybody lets you do this. So just be aware of this, and it's actually really serious. So when they say you'll get kicked out of college, they mean, yeah, you might actually get kicked out of college. So.
Yeah. And I think you said that perfectly. And the two things I would highlight is that even if it was an accident, so, you know, we're not exactly talking about, oh, I forgot one quotation mark here or something. It's more of like, I was writing, I used their words, it got muddled up and I just didn't edit it or whatever. If it's plagiarism, it's plagiarism. Now, it's not, we're not saying this to scare you, but this is maybe showing you the difference between the seriousness of college writing versus maybe the, and again, I don't mean this term to belittle what you've done, but the hand-holding of high school writing. If you're on your own, you're responsible for what you turn in, and you're responsible for knowing whether it's plagiarized or not.
Yeah. And you don't have to do this alone. Like, you can also take this into a writing center, use an online checker, but just be really aware of it. So
yeah. You're not on your own, but it is your responsibility to do those things to make sure.
Exactly.
And then on that note, there's some stuff to talk about with research. So Julia, what's different in college when you're researching for a paper?
So first of all, here's something that's the same. Wikipedia is still not a source. So, because so many college students still try to use Wikipedia. Stuart, what do you tell your high schoolers about using Wikipedia?
So I think Wikipedia is really useful for understanding and learning and making your way through a topic. But when it comes to actual research, and again, this is the type of research we're talking about for a college paper, a serious piece of writing, you don't want to use a source aggregator. You don't want to use a source that's pulling all these other sources in and blending them together, because that's where we lose the thread. So I think use it to understand, use it as a foundation, but then try and find those really specific, unique sources that are going to give you the most direct line to the information.
Yeah, and you kind of become the source aggregator as well.
Exactly.
So you will hurt the Wikipedia. But I would say this exact same thing to my college students. So you still can't cite this, but selection of sources actually becomes much trickier, because before in high school, a lot of the students I work with have teachers who actually will give them the sources, and they'll say, oh, well, you know, analyze this, break this up, synthesize this. But you really become responsible for finding your sources, and you have some great tools for this. For example, every single college basically has a huge library website which has a massive database of all of these sources that you only have access to because you're in college. And after you graduate, it's really sad because you lose it. But but most people don't actually teach you how to use this library website, and you also might not get lessons explicitly on how to analyze sources. But you can find resources on how to do this online, and you can also always ask a librarian or one of your teachers about it. So analyzing sources, finding sources, this is all basically your responsibility once you enter college.
Absolutely. And again, a theme through this is going to be those things your high school teacher did for you, you're doing for yourself now. And you're kind of, it's a little bit corny, but you're going to be your own high school teacher. You're going to be the person who's curating your own sources. You're going to be the person who's holding you to those high standards. And just as Julia said, you're not on your own, but it's no longer people coming to you. You have to go to the people who can help, the sources that can help, all the different things.
Yeah. Oh, that's the most important lesson in college, I think, summarized right there in one sentence. Yeah.
Yeah. Advocacy, 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 which is hard to say 3 times in a row. But now we're looking beyond just what you're writing and where you're getting information, but how you're writing it. So format is going to be something that definitely differs between college and high school. Julia, could you touch on that a little bit?
A lot of high school students have been introduced to MLA. They've also, some students I work with use Chicago style when they're citing, although I haven't seen this in college much actually. But MLA APA becomes less of like a loose guideline and more of exactly how you're expected to format your paper. So I've had a teacher go through my like reference list and correct I didn't make you're in APA, you're supposed to have only the first word of the title capitalized and everything else has to be lowercase. And I had a teacher go through and take off like 5 points because my capitalization was wrong on my reference list. So you're really responsible for getting to know the format that's used within your major and your course of study. And most departments have one that they stick with. And you're also responsible for double checking every single thing you do. And another thing about grammar, in high school, you'll usually get a lot of feedback on your grammar. In college, you're just expected to know it and you'll lose points for this. So I was horrible with commas when I entered college and I got over that really, really quickly because I lost so many points on my first assignment. And you don't have to be perfect at grammar, but you need to get another pair of eyes on your paper. Like you should never turn in a paper that just you has looked at. So have someone else who checks your grammar, have 2 or 3 other people who check your grammar, read your paper aloud and listen for those commas. That's the only thing that worked for me. And be doing this checking as you go through the writing process, which means the paper should not be completed the night before, which I think most people do their freshman year. And another thing to think about is in high school, you oftentimes have this 5-paragraph writing format, right? You're going to have the introduction, body paragraph, body paragraph, body paragraph, conclusion, and you're going to start to kind of deviate from that course a little bit. Once you know the rules of writing, you can start to break them. And good writers, by the time they get to the end of college, will find a way to establish their own voice within those set of rules.
Yeah, and I think probably the most important point we can make today is if you are lacking for someone to look over your papers, if you're feeling alone, ESM is a great place to get someone to join you in your journey of writing. And we have plenty of people who are great writers and who can be that extra set of eyes and kind of be a supplement, a support along the way. But everything Julia said was spot on. And I really want to highlight that last point. As a college professor, you're going to read a ton of papers, and because your relationship is different with students, because you might not have that 5 times a week for a full year relationship, you learn who your students are through their writing and you get to know them. And so if you're reading something formulaic, it can definitely be a little bit of a distancing factor. It can definitely be a negative. And that doesn't mean that you have to become some, groundbreaking, beautiful prose writer. It just means that you don't want to automatically be a robot and produce fill in the blank form. You might have a 2-paragraph introduction. You might have a body paragraph that is, a couple sentences and then one that's a page. And all those rules that you've used, they're there, but they're not those hard, fast ones. And the more you can bend them and mold them into who you are and what you want to say in this specific paper, the more the teacher is going to connect with what you're saying and who you are. And, not all college professors are these cold, icy people who never connect with you, but it is just a fact of the matter. Your high school teachers are more likely going to be the ones who you have a deep relationship with, whereas your college ones are more of a business academic transaction.
And in terms of all of these like formatting points, the grammar, the language you use, the way that you present, that your writing is going to become very reader focused as you move into college. Like in high school, I have a lot of students who do papers for the point of their own self-reflection kind of. And in college, I think a lot of the assignments you're given, you need to write for the reader and think a lot about your audience. So it's not that you don't do that in high school, it's just that almost everything you do in college is going to be very reader focused.
Absolutely, and that does bring up the point where on a class by class basis, your presentation may be different and you're gonna learn to have those different tools in your bag. Where you're writing for an engineering professor, you're gonna play up to their kind of facts and more structured approach. Whereas if you're writing for your English professor, you're gonna make sure it's a little more flowery and maybe, flowy, if those words make any sense. But all of this is fantastic stuff. And again, hearing from Julia is great because you're literally hearing from someone who read the work of recently graduated high schoolers. And I think this next point is something that we're both going to be able to say a lot about, because writing in college isn't just about writing, it's about time management. So what are some of the things around time management that are going to be a part of that college writing experience for these students in 9 months?
So for your freshman comp class, although I will say my college did not have a freshman comp class, I had to learn everything by myself. And depending on your college, you may or may not have one. If you have a freshman comp class, you might have multiple drafts. But after this, as you move into your other classes, it becomes quite rare for you to have multiple drafts. And one of the main reasons for this is professors are really, really, really busy. So they don't want to go through and edit all your work and give you like a grade for completion and have you go back and improve on it. Usually teaching assistants do this, but I was one, I suffered. So, but you're going to be expected to do this drafting process by yourself. So you should be starting these papers at least a week and a half ahead of time. It's also a good idea to create your own outlines and organize your thoughts beforehand, collect all of your sources, and then start writing. So there aren't going to be many check-ins with your teacher throughout this process, but there are people you can check in on campus. So you can go to writing centers. I highly recommend writing centers. They're one of the most underutilized tools on campus. Most students don't even know they exist, but you can sit down with someone and you can do that drafting process with them. You can also do peer tutors, a friend in class, have some sort of study group where you check each other's papers and it kind of evens out if you're doing that for each other, or find an ESM tutor, works as well. So I work with some college students and it's so much fun.
Yeah. And I think, you know, looking at this from a bigger picture, time management comes in so heavily in college because probably on day one, you're going to have a syllabus in your hands that lists every week, every class. So you're going to know when you have a paper due, possibly 2-3 months in advance. And when we talk about time management and fewer drafts, that's not necessarily saying you should do fewer drafts. That's saying that it's not going to be, hey, turn in draft 1, peer edit in class, go over this, draft 2, draft 3. So making this time management, again, being your own high school teacher, maybe 3 weeks before the paper's due, writing an outline. 2 weeks before you do your first draft, later that week you edit. A week before you're on to draft 2 or 3, you bring in a peer tutor, you bring in an ESM tutor, you go to a writing center, and all of a sudden you've managed your time and you've hit all those things we've already talked about, and you've created that high school experience, but for yourself.
Yeah. And really important, you have to set deadlines for yourself and you have to hold yourself accountable. So once I started doing that, I'm quite old fashioned. I had a massive calendar and I made little notes about when I had to have my outline done and highlighted them. And my GPA went up like half a point after that. So you have to learn how to do this, and you have to be accountable to yourself, because your teacher isn't going to make you be accountable to them until the very end, and then they're going to kill your papers. So just
100%. And I love that point too. And it's also, you know, the rub of college is it's great. You have all this freedom. You have way more time. You're not going to be in class from 7:30 to 3:30 every day. But with that freedom, it's easy to lose track of these things. It's easy to have things pile up. You know, you want to go do this social thing. You've got this thing on campus, all of that connected. So I think it's really important to highlight this because, again, good writers can still get bad grades in college if they don't tackle the time management.
Yeah, and your teacher knows when you wrote it the night before, and it hurts us.
Oh, yeah.
It really does. We still have to read that paper.
Exactly. And so with the college writing comes a wide variety of things you might be writing. So we kind of already alluded to the different classes that you might have and the different ways you might write for those. But there's some basic assignments that you might expect in that first year, kind of no matter what. So typical assignments, Julia, could you walk us through these 5, just again, these aren't all of them, but these 5 things you might expect to encounter in college?
Yeah, and I would say this varies a lot from college to college. This is just kind of like the basics of what I see most often. Most freshman comp classes have a rhetorical analysis, which is going to build off of what you were doing in high school. It's going to think about, how the author conveys their opinion. And this is a very structured, basic assignment. It's not something you really have to worry about, and you might not end up doing that unless you're, I don't know, either an English major or have a freshman comp class. If you have very kind teachers who are scaffolding a bit for you, you might have an annotated bibliography. And this is, I think, the most useful assignment that you can have in college, because that a lot of people get to the end of college and they haven't been told how to cite sources, use APA, find sources on the library website, and also analyze those sources. So if you might have an annotated bibliography, and this is going to be really, really useful for learning how to do this and have some scaffolding. It really just depends on your college. And other really, really common assignments are reactions and critiques of reading, which most people have been doing, but in this, you're going to have to be more in depth, have more analysis, and teachers really like to give you very short word counts for these. I'm not sure why. It seems mean, but by the time you're up to your junior and senior year, you're going to be doing more formal research, especially if you're in a less creative field. And this is going to require a lot of source analysis, formal writing ability, and it's going to be really, really dependent on the genre that you're writing in. So if you're an engineering student, read a lot of engineering papers. This is how you get used to what your paper should look like. Because again, this is usually not explicitly taught. It's something that you're supposed to figure out. And Stuart, did you do a thesis when you
I
were
did
in
do a
college?
thesis, yeah. I did my thesis on Jane Austen. So it was, again,
That's
a
awesome.
very English major thesis. But the thesis is that thing that all of this is building to. And just before Julia kind of gives us the behind the curtain look at the thesis, I think the really cool thing when we look at this slide and we see the layout is you can see it building. So if high school is your foundation, it's not like you're going to jump right in the deep end in college. But the point we're trying to make is that if you learn these skills freshman year, then sophomore, junior, and senior year, when you're really getting to the top of the academic mountain, it becomes a lot easier. And at the top of that mountain is your thesis.
Yeah, I did mine on the critical period hypothesis in language development. So it's been done so many times before. So the thesis is going to require a huge amount of independent research, pages for your reference list oftentimes. Some people have to do independent research. I didn't have to do it. Mine was essentially a literature review. But by the time you graduate, even if this isn't a requirement for your major, you should be able to write at this level.
Absolutely. And I think looking again through these aren't like slam dunk guarantees that you're just going to go down this list and go in this order. But if you can do these 5 things, there's a really good chance that anything that's thrown your way, you can adapt. And again, you don't have to be able to write your thesis on day 1, but if you can have the skills we've gone over on day 1, then each step will be easy and you'll be 1 step ahead of the game. And easy might not be the right word, but simpler.
Simpler, straightforward, doable.
Yeah, doable, that's the perfect word. All right. Come on, slides. Did I skip one? Aha. So the big question is, what can I do now? You're sitting there, you're probably either going to a high school class tomorrow, been to one today, whatever the matter is. You know what you can do in high school to get good grades because you've been doing it. But what can you start to do now so that when you show up next August, September, things aren't going to blindside you and you're going to be smoothly transitioning into a college writer? Well, the first thing is recycle and expand. So I'll talk a little bit about this because this is a little bit about taking those high school tools and kind of upping them to the next level. So when we're talking about recycling and expanding, knowing how to find help, we cannot stress enough that you are not alone. The difference is that in high school, the help comes to you, and in college, university, you go to the help. So when you are a good student, it doesn't mean you can do it all on your own. It means you know what you can do on your own and when you need help. That's just a good life lesson. People who are good at things aren't good at them because they tackle it alone. They're good at it because they tackle it alone when they can and get help when they need it. A big thing that's going to happen in college is you're going to learn to know yourself. You're going to know your limits, your strengths, your weaknesses. So if you can start that process today and start to get in touch with where you really do need help and where you can kind of go it alone, that's going to serve you better when you show up on the first day of college. Something that Julia touched on already, and we'll kind of loop back to that, is that paraphrasing does become tricky. So if you can start to practice that now, you can start to work on how you paraphrase a source and how you can make it your own without making it, without stealing it, without changing it. That's a really good step you can take now. Is there anything that comes to mind, Julia, when we talk about how we can become better paraphrasers?
Yes, actually, I have to remember that. So multiple colleges have courses that are free and are available that you can take now. And basically, it teaches you how to paraphrase, and then you have to go through and recognize plagiarism. And a lot of these courses actually will give you a certificate that you can get a number for to say that you completed it. And then when you get to your freshman year, your teacher might actually ask you to do this in class and you're already done, which is good because it's time consuming. So if anyone is interested in these courses, I can't remember, I believe IU has a really, really good course for paraphrasing and plagiarism. Message me or you can email me afterwards and I'll send you a link to it so you can complete it. It's really useful. I had all of my students do it, so.
Perfect. And yeah, and just one note that this webinar will end sometime soon. And after that, we are not disappearing. We are here for you. So we'll give you our emails at the end and you'll be able to contact us if and when you try these things and they go well, they don't go well, you need some help, we're here. So I think what Julia mentions there though is perfect though, because again, if you do these things now, when you're showing up on the first day, there's going to be a lot happening. You're going to have roommates, you're going to have neighbors, there's going to be things going on socially, there's going to be things going on academically, you're going to be exposed to a whole new way of life, perhaps living on your own for the first time. And all of a sudden, having this paraphrasing plagiarism stuff done is a weight off your shoulders, and it also makes you more confident. And the final thing is, and this has been something we've been harping on, and again, it's a little phrase Julia and I came up with that we're somewhat attached to, and the idea is important. Be your own high school teacher. Notice what your high school teacher does for you over these next 6 months. Notice the things they set up for you. Notice how they take you from a piece of reading to a piece of writing, or from an idea to an essay, and start to take note of how you could take those on. And that really circles back to that first bullet point. If you aren't good at one of those things, or one of those things is a struggle for you, just make a mental note that, hey, when I get to that point in the process on my own, that's probably where I want to go to the writing lab. You know, I'm great at writing essays, but the outlines are really tough. I'll go to the writing lab and create the outline. These are just things that when you get there on the first day, if you don't have these organized and ready, it can feel like the sky is falling, everything's different, the world has changed. But if you kind of line them up, then all of a sudden that first year isn't going to feel too crazy different from your last year of high school. Now the resources. So some of these resources are very specific, some are general. It does depend a little bit on what university or school you're going to, but there are some universal ones. So Julia, tell us a little bit about the resources at their disposal.
So for APA format, MLA format, Chicago format, I really recommend Pretty Owl. I think it's one of the best websites out there. You should never be like, I think some people consider themselves experts on formatting and try to just do it from their head and do everything on their own. You don't need to do this. Like you can use EasyBib to like create a reference list. Although if you do this, double check it because it's not always accurate. And as far as setting up your papers and formatting it correctly, Purdue OWL has a lot of resources on this. There are also you can do some research on this because the university you go to might not have the best university writing website. I think Georgetown University or Georgetown University, in my opinion, has one of the best ones. But look around, and if you have any question, type it into Google, and it's going to take you to one of these websites, and you can get advice on it. If you're having trouble with like different kinds of clauses or the complexity of your writing, there will actually be worksheets available for free and feedback that you can get through these websites. And I used that a lot when I was a writing teacher and I had a student who was struggling with one thing specifically. As also, after you start college, I think we've kind of made college teachers sound like this distant entity, but in reality, their door is always open and not that many people go to office hours. So go to office hours. Not only does this get your questions answered, and maybe like I wouldn't go with your entire paper and be like, edit my paper, because that's what writing centers are for, and that's what friends are for. But you can go in and be like, I have this specific question about this sentence, or I'm having a really hard time with my reference list. Can you explain this rule to me? And the teacher will be happy to help. And it also shows that you are self-advocating, you're taking initiative, and you care about the class. And that's very important in college, where teachers might have a ton of students and not get to know them all personally. This sets you apart. Also, if you're having a hard time with research, almost every single campus is going to have a subject librarian for you to search through sources and databases with. So you can get in touch with them and they can explain the research process and show you how to work with the library website. And I really recommend doing this early in college because it just gets busier and busier and busier.
Absolutely. Couple follow-up points just to make it clear. Purdue OWL stands for Online Writing Lab. So it is kind of the gold standard of online writing resources. And again, it cannot emphasize enough, even right after this, just go log on, just check it out. You'll be amazed at all the different ways it can help you. I love what you said, Julia, about working on the complexity of your writing. And she's 100% right. University writing websites will give you the tools and resources to learn about clauses or sentence structures that will take the same idea and allow you to present it in a more complex way, thus making your writing stronger. We left that general. You can always email us for specifics, but if you know what university you're going to, or you have a couple that you've applied to that you're hopeful about, check out their university writing websites. That can be a really good lead into what's going to be expected of you and how you can get a jump on those expectations. And then finally, after you start college, all of those are great. The office hours, really want to emphasize that. Don't go in with your paper, as Julia said, but if your paper is on a book, go in and talk about the book with your professor. Not only will that make your ideas stronger, not only will that build your relationship, but it's just one of those things where you can have, and we don't want to paint professors as robots either. They're humans. And if you do have that connection, it does give you the ability to work on that paper in a more comfortable way, meaning you have a little bit more support than if you've never spoken to this person. And the final point would just be what Julia said. If you go to meet your subject librarian the day before finals, you're going to be one of a million. But if you go on the first day, second day, first week, second week, you're going to kind of be able to establish that and learn the lay of the land before you actually need it. So being early on all of this stuff is a huge help, because when you actually need it, you'll be ready.
Yeah, and college starts very chill for the first couple weeks, and then all of a sudden it's crazy until you graduate. So
yeah, and
prepare
again,
for that.
You'll get those syllabi and you'll have them all lined up, and you'll be like, oh, week one, I have to read like 100 pages for all my classes and total, and that's not that much. But then week 3, week 4 hits and you're like, I have 17 papers due and 4 tests, and I want to go to the basketball game or the football game or whatever. And so Julia's big calendar that she proposed is not a bad idea.
It's wonderful. You can see all of your danger weeks, is what I called them. So.
Yeah, exactly. And you can go to the writing center office hours the week before that, 2 weeks before that, so that you're ready for that week.
And I would say with office hours, they said don't bring the paper in. I checked students' papers during office hours,
Yeah.
but for really busy teachers, like you don't want to bring in your 20-page paper. Just get specific questions before you go in if you do need help with your writing, just so it's not a really lengthy, time-consuming process for them.
One of my favorite things to do, and this is a little bit of a kiss-up move, but if you go in the week before a paper's due to office hours and you have a paper printed out and you chat with them and you're making notes on your own paper, it's really a good sign to the professor that this isn't something you wrote the night before. This isn't something you rolled out of bed and turned in, that you've put a lot of thought and effort into it. And
Yeah.
again, they are human. They do notice these things. And even if that doesn't get you any bonus points or brownie points, it makes your paper better.
Yeah. And it usually does, influence the teacher's opinion of you a little bit, which does help.
Which does help, absolutely. That is the end. We do want to make a really strong note that, again, we did plan on including a example assignment in here, but it really felt to us like that could just be both overwhelming and just not personalized, not specific to where you're at or what you need. So what we're going to offer you is our emails here at the bottom. And these slides will be emailed out to you if you're signed up and registered for this. Reach out to us. And if you're like, man, that rhetorical analysis seemed interesting, but I've never heard of it. Could you give me an example of one? Then we'll send one right over and we'll make it something where we can kind of work on that a little bit together. Julie and I are both busy. It's still college application season, but we'll be here to kind of give you those specific resources if you give us a little guidance as to what would be helpful to you. Questions, comments, or concerns? I haven't seen anything pop up in our chats yet. Anything about what we talked about today catch your attention, make you want to know more, or was a little confusing? If not, we'll just take a minute and appreciate the graphics on the screen. Julie and I were both big fans of this. And that phrase is kind of echoing what we've said. Dangerous to go this alone. We want to emphasize help is available. Two biggest things you can take from today: be your own high school teacher, and the help isn't going to come to you. You have to go to the help. If you internalize both of those, start a little process now, and again, just a little bit and often for the next 6-9 months, you're going to show up on day one and you're going to be a lot more comfortable with one of the biggest parts of college, which is writing.
And one thing I recommend is after you choose a college, since it is good to kind of establish your support system when you first get there in those first couple of weeks before it becomes really busy. Once you've selected a college, I know before I started my undergraduate career, I was just researching my college all the time, especially like the menus at the dining hall, which ended up to be inaccurate and awful anyways. Research where the writing center is, research what kind of resources are available to students, what kind of peer support groups there are, because generally schools have these for every single subject. It's basically the one time in your life where you can get any kind of support for free. So make some plans to take advantage of that, and don't research the cafeteria menus because it'll be a massive letdown once you finally eat the food.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you are there for your degree, you are there for academics, but you're there for a lot of fun stuff as well. And the more you can handle this now, the more the fun stuff becomes available to you when you get there. So we're not just saying this because we want you to begin working on college work now. We're saying this because we want you to have a great time at college. And it's a lot easier to have fun when you're not just drowning in papers and resources. All right. So at this point, we don't have any questions. We've said what we want to say. If you do want to reach out, you have our emails. We really appreciate everyone coming. And just remember, this is the perfect time to begin this process. So if you're a little nervous after hearing all that, overwhelmed, you are doing exactly the right thing by watching Julia and I talk about this and taking some of our advice.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Stuart.
Oh, of course.